So I've lived in New York City for a few weeks now, and I recently found out that 1/3 of all of New York City trash is compostable food waste, which means that it goes straight to landfill. It just sits there and it emits methane, one of the most potent greenhouse gases, which contributes to climate change. So to find out more about how to properly compost and why it's so important, I've decided to meet up with the Lower East Side Ecology Center, a nonprofit based here in New York City who are celebrating their 30th year of composting for New Yorkers. This week, I've decided to save all of my food scraps, and instead of throwing them away in the bin and all of that going to landfill, things like banana peels, avocado, onion skin, and storing it in this bowl in my freezer. And now that the bowl is full, I'm gonna drop it off at the Lower East Side Ecology Center and see how this turns into rich, valuable plant fertilizer.
We're currently at the East River Park compost yard. When folks find out that we're here, they've been jogging past our site for years. They just see piles of dirt-like material, and once they kind of find out that this little hidden nook within the park is really a community space, it really opens people's eyes up. We usually collect about 8 tons a week, and as those materials come onto the site, we start to develop our compost recipe. And it's basically this perfect combination of carbon-rich browns, which are primarily wood chips in our case, and nitrogen-rich food scraps that creates this ecosystem for decomposers such as your worms, your fungi, your microorganisms, to essentially populate this pile and do the work of decomposition. After like 6 to 8 months, the food scraps break down into the material that we call compost. Finished compost is amazing. As you're growing food in a vegetable garden, the nutrients get sucked up from the plants and the nutrients are depleted. And so by adding compost to a garden bed, you're kind of adding that nutrient source back into the soil that you're growing food in. Healthy soils are actually able to sequester excess carbon from the atmosphere. And so as we're talking about climate change and global warming, this is an element that's really important to look to our soils as a way to store that excess carbon. There's a couple of ways that you can compost in a New York City apartment. If you're motivated to make your own compost to put on your houseplants, you can get an indoor worm bin. The boxes can be just like a Tupperware box. You create like a bedding of newspaper, you get these special red wiggler worms, and the worms will break down your food scraps. Heard of New Yorkers who have these worm bins and they store them under their sink or even under their bed? Your waste bin dramatically shrinks. That's one of the things that I hear from most people once they start composting. They're like boggled by how much food waste they're generating, even living in a small New York apartment. Composting is a miraculous process, and I think everyone should have their hand in a pile of compost at some time in their life.
So after spending some time with the Lower East Side Ecology Center, it's clear that composting is very important. It's super easy and it's not as scary and as gross as it may seem. The Lower East Side Ecology Center is only one of many organizations in New York City that tries to limit the amount of food waste that goes to landfill. There's a lot of community gardens in the city that do the same thing. So if you have access to a drop-off site or a community garden, composting is probably one of the easiest and most sustainable things that you can do to improve your ecological footprint. So I can't encourage it enough to try yourself and compost in your own home.